Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a frontline update for the 16th of March 2023. Before we go to the front lines, to the northeast sector, let's just have a little look to see what the ISW says. I think this is certainly worthy of note. The overall pace of Russian operations in Ukraine appears to have decreased compared to previous weeks. The Ukrainians stated on March 15th that Russian offensive actions have decreased significantly over the last week and noted that daily Russian ground attacks have decreased from 90 to 100 attacks to 20 to 29 per day. So that's a decrease of about 70%. That's huge. Now, considering we're expecting a Russian or a Russian offensive, that's what this is supposed to be. This is incredibly significant. We are seeing stuff happening in Bakhmut. Avdiivka's not looking very good at the moment. Marinka, same as usual. Vuhledar, yes. But outside of that, there's, you're talking about Svatova to Kremina, really not a lot going on. Things are quiet, possibly somewhat positional. And I think that is very significant. Also worthy of note, Wagner Group financier Yevgeny Prigozhin commented on reports about the dismissal of the Russian commander of the airborne VDV forces, Colonel General Mikhail Teplinsky, and that likely revealing Teplinsky's affiliation with Wagner. This happened a few weeks back, but I think it's significant. This spat between the MOD and Prigozhin is, I think, very important. It'll be interesting to see that whatever the resolution is to Bakhmut, what will happen with Wagner and Prigozhin. I don't know. I think it's something to look out for, obviously. Right, let's go to the front line then. We'll go to the northeast sector, which is Kupiansk to Svatova to Kremina. Here, this axis there, not a massive amount to report. Some shelling in the Kupiansk area as per normal. District of Kupiansk there taking a bit of a beating. Actually, let's have a look at Null Reports. Null Reports says, based on recent footage, geolocation, and reports from sources in the area, this is the most recent situation. The bridgehead at Zaporizhzhia is no longer. The front is south of Hranikivka. So this is to say that the front, Hranikivka, seems to be happening. The fighting is happening down there, not towards Zaporizhzhia. Where's my map gone? So if we look at my map, it appears that the fighting is not westwards across the Oskil River. I mean, it would be difficult to cross that river. That's just an added headache for the Russians. So they look to be going south. However, the point of me bringing up No Report's map is actually that he has Liman Pershi under under Ukrainian control, quite solidly. It's not even in the grey area. It is blue of Ukrainian control, as well as Sinkivka. Now, Defmon has had Sinkivka under Russian control. Is the only map that does. But I find this interesting. I don't have that, but it could be the case. I don't know who is right there. But he would be one of the only mappers I've seen with that. In fact, I questioned him on that. Someone else did on Twitter to say, Liman Pershi under Ukrainian control. That's a pretty big claim. Anyway, there might be some movement there. As we come further down south, there's been a hit just to the west of Kurikivka here. War Monitor says Ukrainian artillery hit and destroyed a Russian command post along with several B-27 Yugon MLRS near Pokrovska. Now, yesterday, I think it was, there was quite a big number of MLRS taken out. Now, I was commenting how there have been a number of MLRS over the last few days taken out, and this could be representative of that, which is obviously good news for the Ukrainians in the area. Let's go and look at what's going on further down south. So as we come past, I don't really know what's going on with Kuzymivka. I had that as ISW's mapping as a Ukrainian claim of counteroffensive. I've kept it there, but it might not be that the Ukrainians have control over Kuzymivka. Okay, let's go to the ISW. The Russian MOD claimed that 6 Russian assault groups of the combined 6th Combined Arms Army seized part of an unspecified industrial zone and unspecified Ukrainian positions in the Kupiansk direction. I mean, goodness knows where that is, but ISW is unable to confirm the MOD's vague claim. So this is like the Kupiansk direction. There's been some gains for the Russians. Who knows where? But yeah, as we come further down south, it's the usual places: Makivka, Nevska, towards Yampolivka. So the ISW says, repelled attacks around all these places. Another Russian source claimed that Russian forces attacked Belorivka, Nevska, and Makivka and advanced towards Yampolivka. But again, that's something that I had yesterday. I did have a representation of a little bit of an advance, a couple of fields here and there over the last week. But that's that. No other movement on any other map as I've seen. A Ukrainian source claimed that Ukrainian tank used foggy weather to conduct a surprise indirect fire attack against Russian positions 20 kilometers away near Lysychansk. Well, that's interesting because Lysychansk is all the way over there. So goodness knows whether that's a tank that's just smacked through the fog. I don't know. But anyway, let's go continue further down south from there. So as I said, Mikivka, Yempelivka, and Bilorivka on the in the news again for repelled attacks, but nothing too substantial. I showed you evidence of a T-90 in the Kremlin area being captured by the Ukrainians, and that falls into the claim or supports the claim from the Ukrainians that Serhiy Haidai said T-90s have been used up in this area. The Russians brought them to bear in their offensive here, and they're now going back to using T-72s because they appear to have used them all up. They've lost them, had them captured, so on and so forth, which is significant because that is their most recent tank, other than the ill-fated T-14 Armata. Right, what's the best way to describe what's going on in Bakhmut, or way to do it first? I guess, okay, their advances, Zalizhnyansky has fallen to the Russians in the north. They're trying to put pressure on Orikovo-Vasilivka here and towards Minkivka and advance towards this road. The road by Kromove is under a huge amount of fire. There's apparently ATGM access, or the Russians can hit that with ATGMs, as well as using MLRS, multiple launch rocket systems, on the other, well, basically all the roads, I think, going in. But there might have been a counterattack of the Ukrainians yesterday in the Kromove area to keep the Russians back there. The steel works, or the metal works here. There's fighting in the tunnels there. The Russians have made some advances. They've made advances east as well. So this whole area there, I had under Russian or grey zone yesterday. It's now, this is controlled by the Russians. And then if we come down to the south, they've made advances all over the south, most notably here around, what is it? Korsunkoho Street. This one, so they made advances to the north there, as well as pretty much all over the place down the south. So, right, let's see first of all what ISW said. Pretty much all of that. That the Russian mill bloggers have also claimed that Wagner fighters continue to fight in the tunnels of the Azov complex in northern Bakhmut and advance on Kurantskoho Street towards the Bakhmut Industrial College in southern Bakhmut. Russian sources reported fighting the Ivanivska, so that's the town, a little sort of village to the southwest of Bakhmut, and claimed that Ukrainian forces are counterattacking in this area. The one mill blogger claimed that Russian troops completely cover the Bakhmut-Kromova route with ATGM anti-tank guided missile fire, and there are repelled attacks pretty much everywhere around there. Okay, now let's look at the Syriac maps to see what they have as far as gained territory in the area. So we go first to, so this is the earliest one, this is from yesterday, a counterattack near Kromove. As the RSW said, this road coming into Bakhmut is under ATGM fire from the Russians. So I presume this is an attempt to push them back. However, they have taken an area just here to the north, in the northern area of Bakhmut. I've adapted my maps back to Syriac apps, actually. So if we go to where we're talking about here, this is Kromove, and this is the area that they have had some success in. Around here, they've taken this area. I did have them having control of this area before, but Syriac Maps doesn't, and I have adapted my map to have Ukrainian control of that area. Anyway, sorry. So that's what they say here. Advance from Ilyanovka district towards Kromove, taking control of the forest that's here and the northern shore of Pivnichny Pond. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian army retook some positions north of Kromove on the Chaziv Yar road. So there's a bit of give and take there. As we come down to the next map, you can see that they've taken a huge area here in the south. Situation south of Bakhmut city. Russian army has made new advances in Vodokanal district towards the stadium. In addition, troops captured the highest area of Zaporizhzhia district and the rest of Mariupol cemetery, following the withdrawal of the Ukrainian army. So this is the cemetery area here. So basically, on my map, to go back, this is the area here. They made advances along here, as I say, north or northeast along this road going to Bakhmut, but also quite a vast amount of territory here and the rest of the cemetery. So they've made really good advances, the Russians there. I put far greater sort of grey zone around or between the two forces. So that is what Syriac map says of there before it goes on to Avdiivka. So now let's go and have a little look at what Kenneth Gregg said. So this is a Swedish fighter fighting in Ukraine. Don't know if he's actually in Bakhmut at the moment. Don't think so, but he has been there. But he's got obviously lots of contacts. So he says a few interesting things. This is what he said yesterday. He said the loss of Zalizhnyansky, so that's that northern village, and it is just a small village, and there is evidence that this has happened. So there you go, the footage of Wagner forces in Zalizhnyansky there. There's definitely they have lost that, but it is a hamlet of a few villages, or a few buildings. So he says this gives the Russian an advantage because there are no settlements within 4 to 5 kilometers of Zalizhnyansky, so it's just open land, and the Ukrainians could have done without them taking that. Russians attacked Ivanivska and reached the outskirts of the community, but then they were driven back. Things are happening in the town, so there's been news since then. Referring to what's happening around Kromova. So on a positive note, the 3rd Battalion and 92nd Mechanized Brigade recaptured trenches northwest of Kromove and defeated a subsequent counterattack. So that's what we saw from Syriac maps there. An officer of the 93rd Mechanized Brigade complained that the Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut are now are low on ammunition and have basically no shells for hitting the enemy in occupied parts of the city. I've reported that before. This is because the Russians have our maintenance roads under artillery fire. If we don't counterattack soon and clear at least one of the access roads, we can only retreat from the city. The Russians have started using disruptive fire on the road from Konstantinivka to Bakhmut with MLRS rocket launchers and have having multiple combat parts. So it's not good. The other front lines are basically in a standstill. Now, he says, and I talked about this morning in the news, now I must warn you that there have been these accounts on TikTok, on Telegram, saying that things are really bad for the Ukrainians in Bakhmut. And it does look like things are genuinely bad, but the claims are that everything's awful and why don't we pull out, and being annoyed with the commanders. Kenneth Gregg, interestingly, here says, watch out, a lot of these are fake because you wouldn't be doing this on mobile phones and having these long recordings sent out because it endangers you. So everything is basically done by Starlink. The internet only works with Starlink. Take all such reports with a large pinch of salt. Claims of Ukrainian soldiers fighting in Bakhmut and surroundings on Telegram and TikTok are ostensibly dodgy. A fighting soldier on the front line makes only short and irregular updates. Long reports that require the internet to get an overview of the whole situation are certainly fake. So that's worth considering. Now, today, Kenneth Gregg says, now Bakhmut has become the new Marinka. Nobody knows right now where the contact lines are. There are street fights in the center and in the suburbs. The Russians have crossed the river to the north and south. It is likely that during the day they will also cross it in the east. In the past, Russians have tried to surround the city but failed. I don't think they will succeed now either, but we will see fighting street by street, just like in Marinka. I have doubts about the competence of Bakhmut's commander. He has two big failures on his account with big losses of our own people. I hope he has learned something and is not trying to redeem himself from previous failures with another big failure. I hate officers who only think about their career and not about what's good for the crew. We used to have a ratio of 1-7 in enemies and eliminated, but now the risk is 1-1 when you have street fighting. Then we should have withdrawn in good time. He goes on to talk about Avdiivka, and I'll get to that later. Now, Dmitry War Translated says from a Ukrainian Bakhmut Demon channel, Telegram channel, with close links to defenders, it gives an update on Bakhmut and believes encirclement of the city is unlikely. Firstly, Bakhmut is not encircled and it is unlikely that the Russians will manage to encircle it. They themselves do not believe in their ability to do so. It is spring here. The road of life is under partial fire control of the enemy, but it is ours. If we hold on until April, the tides will turn and we will begin to steadily push them back. Second, and then goes on to talk of Vuhledar. So that's interesting. I'll come back to those games. I'm going to go back to the ISW now, who do a general claim about Bakhmut, that they think the Wagner Group offensive on Bakhmut is appearing to be nearing culmination. Now, they have said this before. So I guess we must be careful to take everything, at face value. But they do have some data to bring to bear here. So Prigozhin notably claimed that Wagner captured Zalizhnyansky, a tiny rural settlement 9 kilometers northwest of Bakhmut on the east side of the E40 Bakhmut-Sloviansk highway, which indicates that Wagner forces are likely conducting opportunistic localized attacks on settlements further north of Bakhmut that are small and relatively easier to seize. Recent Wagner gains north of Bakhmut suggest that manpower, artillery, and equipment losses in fights for Bakhmut will likely constrain Wagner's ability to complete a close encirclement of Bakhmut or gain substantial territory in battles of urban areas. The capture of Zalizhnyansky and other similarly small towns north of Bakhmut and east of E40 highway is extremely unlikely to enhance Wagner's ability to capture Bakhmut itself or make other operationally significant gains. It is therefore likely that Wagner's offensive on Bakhmut is increasingly nearing culmination. Russian forces would likely have to commit significant reserves to prevent this culmination. They may be able to do so, as ISW has observed elements of Russian airborne regiments in and around Bakhmut that do not seem to be heavily committed to the fighting at the moment. The Russians might also commit elements of other conventional units, including possibly the 2nd Motorized Rifle Division or units drawn from elsewhere in the theatre. But it seems that Wagner offensive will not be sufficient to seize Bakhmut. Russian forces are not pursuing active or successful offensive operations elsewhere in the theatre, and as the pace of operations slows along critical sectors of the front, Ukrainian forces likely have an increased opportunity to regain initiative. And so they say a decrease. Ukrainian military sources have noted a markedly decreased number of attacks in and around Bakhmut, particularly over the last few days. So, on the one hand, they are taking significant, I think significant, as in, there are incremental gains, but they're not insignificant, I guess, around Bakhmut. And that is putting huge pressure on the Ukrainians there. But on the other hand, there are a few attacks all around the area, and it appears like things are grinding or slowing down. Yes, they've taken Zalizhnyansky. Wasn't particularly difficult to take. It's just a tiny hamlet, although it is a bit of a problem because there's nothing for the next 4 or 5 kilometers. But they've got larger front lines, fewer troops. They have a lack of ammunition, and Prigozhin has been whinging about everything. At the same time, they've made no gains to the south. Ukraine are potentially counterattacking there, and they've put on a little counterattack around Kromova. Now, the question is, do Ukraine have forces to bring to bear? Are they going to do some big punch, or is this just a slow suffocation and a pulling out the forces? I mean, you would expect something to happen in the next 24 to 48 hours tops, and if it doesn't, then it does just appear like Ukraine are withdrawing and trying to bleed Russia for as much as they can. But there are these conflicting claims going on from within Ukrainian ranks, and it is difficult to know, and I've said this for the last 3 days, exactly what the intentions are. But again, we shall see. It is difficult there. There will be huge losses for both sides, but evidently the Ukrainian command think it's worth holding on. And it's easy to second guess from sitting in a house on thousands of miles away. But so I won't do that. I would just assume that Ukraine know what they're doing. Otherwise, they are possibly making a big mistake. But something might be coming, or there are figures that we are not privy to that, or actually figures that they are claiming that the Russians are making huge losses and they are accurate. Claim that they're accurate supports the idea that they are, or the fact that they are staying there at the moment trying to defend Bakhmut. Just last thing about Bakhmut, no reports who's a pro-Ukrainian mapper says to the front, Russian troops have gained terrain in the northern suburbs of Bakhmut and are advancing north of the cemetery to the west of the Danbar Reservoir. Russian troops have also conquered more blocks. The situation in Bakhmut becomes, I don't know what word that is. If you ask me, it's time to leave. And that's what I'm talking about with Bakhmut is really splitting people at the moment. And as I showed you on the news this morning, a news update this morning, a Su-24, which is a two-manned aircraft, one of the pilots, the pilot or the gunner, survived, but that was shot down near Bakhmut as well. So they are taking aerial losses there. Right, as we move on to Avdiivka, it's difficult in Avdiivka. So there have been gains in Krasnohorivka. I've now updated my map to reflect that Krasnohorivka is under the control of the Russians. That Deep State had a few days ago, and no reports, for example, was saying not too sure. I won't change it yet. I've now changed mine, aligning to the Deep State and claims like rebar. So in that Krasnohorivka area, Suryat Maps, a pro-Russian mapper, says current situation around Avdiivka city. The Russian army and DPR forces have completely secured the town of Krasnohorivka. In addition, troops made small advances south and east of Kamyanka, trying to surround the town. So this is Kamyanka down there. Krasnohorivka is up here. And as I've said, I've changed my maps to accommodate that the Russians taking that settlement. Vuhledar doesn't have that on their map, but I think it probably is the case that the Russians are in control there. Defmon and no reports. Defmon didn't do any mapping yesterday, and no reports has nothing on Avdiivka. Rebar pro-Russian source says north of Avdiivka, Russian troops completely cleared Krasnohorivka. The settlement came under the control of the Russian armed forces. At the moment, the Russian army are advancing west of the village and entrenching themselves in the liberated areas. Due to the loss of Krasnohorivka, Ukrainian formations have been actively transferring ammo and essential supplies to Avdiivka in the past few days. In case of a defensive breach, 15 men from the 116th Brigade Unit of the AFU Territorial Defence arrived at the front line. Very, very exact. The AFU 53rd Motorised Mechanised Brigade and 145 and 147 separate battalions conducted reconnaissance in force, advancing from the outskirts of Svierne. Ukrainian formation managed to recapture one position, but they could not advance further, losing 8 people wounded. With the liberation of Krasnohorivka, the situation in the AFU in Avdiivka is made worse, but it is too early to talk about encircling and attacking the fortified area itself. First, it is necessary to create a foothold by cutting supply lines. On the other hand, Tendar, who's a pro-Ukrainian source, says of Krasnohorivka, the situation around Krasnohorivka north of Avdiivka is a bit blurry. All that we have for certain is that Russians made it initially to this forest at those coordinates, but that the same footage also shows that they got hammered there, and then refers to some footage that shows that things didn't go too well for the Russians in that area. So that is putting the other side of the story there. It doesn't seem to indicate, as far as Tendar is concerned, too much territory that the Ukrainians have lost in the Krasnohorivka area. Sorry, that was going down south. Pro-Russian sources claim that all of Krasnohorivka is taken, but as you can see here, not as according to Tendar. And then south of Avdiivka, another fight taking place with some geolocated footage. So you've got the airport, you've got Opitny, you've got Vuhledar, you've got Svierne, and there was this Rebar admitted a counterattack in Svierne coming down south, pushing the Russians back a little bit. And then there is some video footage to support that claim, which shows a main battle tank getting taken out and 2 BMPs. So that's a tank getting hit. The BMPs managed to get away by the looks of it, but the main battle tank was certainly taken out of action. And you can see the size of these, the artillery getting hit, people running from the tank. Oh dear, I don't think they're going to last too much longer. But you can see how, there are people running all over the shop. You can see how big these craters are as the BMP is just up and down, trying to navigate its way through these huge artillery shell craters. It's almost like a moonscape, isn't it? Asteroid craters on a moon. But there you go. So the tank is cooking off, and the BMPs run away, having collected some of the troops, those who are left. So that is what's happened in Avdiivka to the south. Just gives you an idea, puts a bit of meat on the bones to the claims that are being made of the area. When we go back to one of the pro-Ukrainian channels, talks about Avdiivka. The situation there is very difficult right now, but the Russians have insufficient forces for attacks. And Kenneth Gregg says the Avdiivka front has positive news. At Novelska, the Russians suffered serious losses and withdrew from previously occupied lines. Fighting is continuous in Marinka and near Avdiivka. The ISW doesn't say anything about Krasnohorivka. Talks about fighting all around, all the usual places around there, nothing particular. So we have possibly Russians doing taking some territory in the to the north of Avdiivka, but when we come down to the southwest, particularly Novelska, it appears that they have been defeated or pushed back in the area. Now, as far as I understand it, Deep State Map had some area of this tree line that is no longer under Russian control. So I think they lost around here, to be very exact. But around Novelsky, they have, the Russians being pushed back, and according to Reba, Russians being pushed back from Severny as well towards Vodiany. So mixed bag there. And then we come down past Krasnohorivka towards Marinka, and Marinka here. So what do we have about Marinka? Suryat Maps has a few claims here. Recent video footage shows Russian tanks being destroyed by Ukrainian artillery, which confirms the first one controls. So Russia controls all the positions around the road towards Krasnohorivka in the northern part of Marinka. So if we geolocate this footage for that tank getting blown up. So that is a Russian tank being blown up, but the idea is on the road there. So where is that? That is here. And in fact, so I'm just going to stop there. In fact, so you can see that's where the tank was blown up, driving along that road. There have been some Russian gains here. I've adjusted my map today to reflect that. So there is a push towards the west there, but a tank has been destroyed. We go back to Suryat Maps. They then go on to say, moreover, another video footage shows clashes continue in the center of Marinka, with Druzhby Avenue being the current front line, without many changes in the last days. So here you have, that's where the tank was hit, and then you've got geolocated footage to show fighting going on there. But things really haven't changed an awful lot in the center of Marinka. Although there is some area to the north where it appears that the Russians have gained. So there is incremental movement there. Okay, let's go to ISW. So the ISW has quite a bit to say about Vuhledar. Just to remind you, Vuhledar is down here in the corner, down south from Marinka, still in Donetsk. So Vuhledar and then Pavlivka and Mikilska, these two places are on lower ground down to the south and to the southeast of Vuhledar, and they will be mentioned by ISW here. That says the Ukrainian General Staff reported that Russian troops conducted unsuccessful offensives, and then the Russian MOD claimed that Ukrainian troops conducted unsuccessful attacks. So who knows? A Russian mill blogger posted footage of Mortarmen of the 5th Separate Guards Tank Brigade firing on Ukrainian strongholds in the Dacha area southeast of Vuhledar. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense posted an image on March 14th, reportedly of a Russian diary, and I've talked to you about this several times, found near Vuhledar that shows huge losses during Russian assaults in the area. The diary details that during assaults over the course of 4 days, 57 of the 434 Russian soldiers sent into battle survived, which is just over 13% survival rate. A mill blogger affiliated with the SND Southern Military District tank elements discussed footage of elements of the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade, so those are Marines, detonating a mine near Vuhledar, and noted that this demonstrates that the Russian forces are rushing operations and failing to employ sound mine clearing practices, which is certainly true. It appears Vuhledar is just still a problem for the Russians. It's interesting to see what this Telegram channel, the pro-Ukrainian Telegram channel, says. Secondly, Vuhledar, I'm in contact with some brothers. Over the past few days, they've given the Russians a good beating and took a few hedge roads. However, the Russians in Pavlivka and Mikilska are feeling confident and want to attack, but do not have enough vehicles to do so. Everything will be okay in Vuhledar as long as we hold out until the middle of April. Obviously, people like Rebar and Suryat don't really make much mention of Vuhledar, but yeah, I think it's just a case of beating their heads against a brick wall there again. And as that source says, if the Ukrainians can hold out there, they've done an incredible job of holding out and attriting Russian forces significantly in that area. Although it's just worth pointing out a very rare bit of yellow gained territory. So I reflected that yesterday in my mapping. Poulet-Volant here has the Ukrainians regaining some of that area to the southeast of Vuhledar, some of that Dacha area that the Russians did have control over. Okay, we're going to go. Oops, we're going to go and have a little look at Zaporizhzhia. As we come west along the front line towards Orikhiv, in the Zaporizhzhia Oblast, so we've got Orikhiv here. There was apparently a small recon attack of the Ukrainians south of Orikhiv. So if we look here, geolocated drone footage of a small recon unit that ended pretty roughly for the AFU, says a pro-Russian voice there. And it's geolocated to south of Avdiivka, which is south of here, so on this road somewhere. And that shows a couple of, well, at least possibly 2 vehicles blown up by the Russians, but Ukrainian vehicles. So the Ukrainians attempted a failed offensive south of Orikhiv in the Zaporizhzhia Oblast. They appear to have lost a couple of armored vehicles. Some say, 3, but actually, if you look closely, some of the things on fire aren't actually vehicles. I think, as far as I can tell, they are like planks of wood or I don't know, crates or something. So, but it's interesting that out in the middle of these roads, you just got these tiny little pieces of trench network going on. They seem to be everywhere. But yes, so that seemed to be a failed attack by the Ukrainians, not a large-scale attack. It does look like a recon unit just doing some work down there. There are claims in the ISW that the Ukrainians, at least from the Russians claim that they repelled an amphibious attack from Nikopol. Nikopol is here on the reservoir near the Dahar nuclear power plant. So the ISW says that took place. Don't know that anything came of that. They attempt to conduct an amphibious assault from Nikopol across the reservoir towards Russian positions, but it was repelled, one presumes. Other than that, not too much to state. There's a lot of talk about the fortifications still being built extensively in the area, but not too much about Kherson or any other news about hits behind the lines there over the last 24 hours. Anyway, hopefully that was of use to you. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. And I appreciate all your support. The ways you can support the channel in the description below. PayPal and buy me a coffee. But just watching these videos and commenting as you do, really, really super amazing. So thank you. Take care and speak later.